Alright, guys, Corey Margera here, and basically, I want to do a comparison of, the Sam Raimi Spider Man trilogy and the Mark Webb Spider Man trilogy, the Amazing Trilogy. But, well, duology, the two movies that Mark Webb made so far. And, I've made it no secret that I prefer the Mark Webb movies over the original Sam Raimi trilogy for years now, but I really want to get into more detail of why I prefer Mark Webb's movies over the original Raimi trilogy. I have nothing against Sam Raimi. I have nothing against Tobey Maguire. I have nothing against the original cast, James Franco, Kirsten Dunst. I have not. It's this is nothing personal. It's just I think that the way you did your films was just completely ridiculous in so many ways, you know. Whereas Mark Webb, Andrew Garfield's just I'm just gonna get this out the way. Andrew Garfield is a superior Spider-Man. He is just a way more fucking badass Spider-Man. He's cooler. He's funnier. He just the way he makes fun of the villains and stuff in the first two in the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. He's just really cool. I mean, and the thing is too, he's a good guy too. It's not like he's like Tony Stark's Iron Man. He's not like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, where you could just see like, wow, this guy is he's pretentious. He just wants to have world peace just to stroke it down his own fucking ego. But in this movie, you know, Andrew Garfield, he gives life to Spider-Man. He makes Spider-Man cool, but he also makes him, humble and down to earth. Whereas Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, he's just way too fucking nerdy for his own good. I mean, and I know, I'm a huge fucking Spider-Man fan. I know Spider-Man in the comics. I know he starts out as a awkward, socially awkward, nerdy motherfucker. Okay? But my thing is, once he becomes Spider-Man, he starts to come into his own. And that's something that Garfield does. And like, literally, I mean, and the thing is, too, people want to act like, Andrew Garfield was too cool for Spider-Man. Like, he wasn't awkward at all. And he wasn't nerdy at all. He wasn't smart. First of all, Andrew Garfield, he plays the role of Peter Parker, like, as far as his intelligence, very well. Like, coming up with the web cartridges, which happened in the comics. It wasn't organic web. It was in the comics. He came up, he made he made his own web. I mean, he was a nerd, and he was socially awkward, but it wasn't to the point where I'm like, oh my god, this guy is just way too pathetic. And I actually like it better than the comics in a way, because he was like that in the comics. He was like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, where he was kind of pathetic earlier on, and then he became, he grew into his own later on in the series. But in this, he's just like, literally, he's a nerd, and he's awkward, and he's introverted. He's very quiet too in a lot of scenes in these movies too. He's very quiet. He's not a talker. People want to act like, oh, like he's Tony Stark or something like that. He's too cool for school. Like, I mean, there's a lot of, like, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man to me is the perfect Spider-Man. He's the perfect Peter Parker, in my opinion. He's the perfect Spider-Man. He just does the role so well. He's a likable character. He's funny. He just, and there's just so many things that this Spider-Man does. Not that Tobey Maguire wasn't a humble person. He obviously was. But I mean, it's just like, where was the funny? Where were the jokes that Spider-Man cracks on his villains? I mean, during the scene where he even tries to talk out the Electro, he's trying to, calm him down. He's not trying to fight Electro yet. He's trying to calm him down, And if it wasn't for that fucking sniper's fault, Electro probably, he would have gotten help. They probably would have gotten him help a lot sooner. He wouldn't have even turned into a bad guy. But because Electro thought that Spider-Man told the sniper to shoot him, he basically thought, he felt betrayed. And that's a lot of thing. That's another thing that people don't talk about in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, because they want to hate it so much. When the movie doesn't even deserve that much hate. It was nowhere near as bad as Spider-Man 3. All right, come on, folks. It was not as bad as Spider-Man 3. Get the fuck over it. It was a much better film. Granted, I felt, I really do feel like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 gets so much fucking hate, and it does not deserve the hate it gets. All right, first of all, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a much better film than Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3 combined. It's much better than Spider-Man 3. It's much better than a lot of superhero films. So let's calm down here, folks. All right. And, because this movie gets way too much hate. And it's better than Man of Steel, too. That's another movie it's better. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is better than Man of Steel. So, but there's so many movies I could think The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is better than. But, a lot of people, like, a lot of nitpicks about this movie just really piss me off, because some of them are kind of stupid. All right. For example, when people want to bring up the fact that, the Rhino got he got short, he didn't get enough screen time. Like, I'm like, shut the fuck up, seriously. It's like, the Rhino has always been a petty villain. He's always been a C-list villain. He's never been a major thorn in Spider-Man's thigh in the comics. He's always been a petty villain. All right, he was never like literally, and and the same thing, the same thing can be said about the fucking Sandman. But we'll get into that later. All right, I just want to go over just a few more things, and I just feel like Andrew Garfield, he has better chemistry too. Like, the romance between him and Gwen Stacy, who's played by Emma Stone, is just like, you can actually feel like they actually want to be together, and it's not a load of bullshit. It's not like, oh, we want to be together. No, we don't. Yes, we do. No, we don't. Like in the fucking Raimi trilogy. Like, in this movie, they get to the point. Like, they literally, they get to the point. You can actually tell that they have really great chemistry. And then the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, that was so much better than the original Spider-Man from 2002 ending. It was so much better, because he knows that he made a promise to Gwen's father, not to get her involved and to not to be with her because he was Spider-Man. And Andrew Garfield, his Spider-Man, he does feel kind of guilty. He doesn't want to get her hurt, but at the same time, he loves her. He's not bullshitting around. He's not like, oh, I don't blah, blah, blah. No, he actually says, you know what? When he arrives late to class at the end of the movie, he's like, you know what? You can't make promises. The teacher's like, you can't make promises you can't keep. And then Andrew Garfield, he's like, yeah, but sometimes those are the best kind. And then Gwen Stacy just smiles. She turns around and smiles. And it's just like, that scene was just so well done, in my opinion, because it's like, we're not going to bullshit. We're not going to bullshit this whole, like the Raimi movies did, where, you know what, these two want to be together. These two have excellent chemistry. Like, just let's put it out there. We're going to bring this in. Like, it's that's what we're going to do. All right, and I love The Amazing Spider-Man just for that alone. For a lot of things, but especially for that. Because it's like, wow, we're going to stop the bullshit. Other things that I just really, really enjoy about, I'm actually going to give a little bit of credit where credit's due. I'm going to give Raimi's side a little bit of credit. I really enjoyed how they wrote, how James Franco and Tobey Maguire, as Peter and Harry, they were best friends. and then all of a sudden they're enemies in the third movie, and they show you in two movies why. But my thing is, and it's good chemistry, it's good acting, it's good. But my thing is, the Green Goblin should have never died in the first place. I mean, Norman Osborn should have never died in the first place, and that was my biggest problem with the fucking Raimi movies. I mean, you kill off the Green Goblin at the end of the first movie. He basically, he's trying to use his glider to attack Spider-Man, but then Spider-Man dodges it, and then he ends up killing himself. To me, that was just like, and he was like, whoa. Like, it was just like so. Looking back at that scene too, it was just so goofy. It was so ridiculous. It was just like, whoa, I just died. It was just like, wow, really, this is what we're doing here, And it just, it does not age well. It's really ridiculous. And for people saying like, oh, Batman doesn't kill, and we're sick of seeing all the Batman villains die and stuff like that. All the Nolan fanboys are all that shit. You can argue the same points about fucking Spider-Man. The villains aren't supposed to die at the end of every fucking movie. It's like, literally, it's like, let these guys like come back or have revenge or something like that. And that's one thing I really did enjoy about the Mark Webb trilogy, was the fact that they didn't kill off all the fucking villains. They kept them alive. So if we do see Kirk Connors come back in a sequel or something like that, he's still alive. They didn't just kill him off. And that's one thing I didn't like about the Sam Raimi trilogy. They killed off every fucking villain, with the exception of Sandman. But you could argue he kind of like vanished into thin air at the end of Spider-Man 3. And it was just like, wow, like really, like did you, like but all the flaws with the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy, I'll take over all the flaws of the Sam Raimi trilogy. I'm just gonna leave it at that, because if we're gonna, okay, first of all, if we're gonna turn Venom into fucking this, if we're gonna have the guy from that '70s show and from the 2010 Predator movie play fucking Venom, that skinny motherfucker, Topher Grace, and we're like literally, he's not even built up. He doesn't even work out. He doesn't. You don't even, like, literally, they don't even build this up. Like, if you want to bitch about the Rhino in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, you have to bitch about Venom. Because at least you can argue in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, Rhino was a petty fucking villain. Venom is not a petty fucking villain. He's one of the best Spider-Man villains of all time. Alright? You don't fucking treat Venom like that, Raimi. What the fuck? And you don't make the Sandman, who is a fucking minor fucking villain, you don't make him one of the main villains. Alright? Like, literally, they took the Sandman and made him like he was a major villain or something like that, like in the comics. Like, no, like the movie should have been the New Goblin, Harry is the New Goblin, and Venom. Those should have been the only two main antagonists. You should not even have brought the Sandman in. The whole, oh, guess what, the real killer of your Uncle Ben is still out there. It's like we really needed that. Like, we really need it was just like, oh, just to get some shocks in. Like, oh, wow, the killer of Uncle Ben is still actually out there? Like, no, it was bullshit. But to be fair, I will say this about the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy. I don't like how, they quickly abandon, Andrew Garfield trying to get revenge on his uncle's killer. They quickly abandoned it. Like, first, he's trying to find out who killed his Uncle Ben. But then all of a sudden, he wants to find out more about his parents, which I like in this movie. I like it. And for people saying, like, oh, well, this movie only appeals to hardcore Spider-Man fans, doesn't appeal to the casual fans. Wouldn't going after his parents and trying to find out who he really is, explain a lot more to the casual viewer than, hey, I'm Tobey Maguire, he's living with Uncle Uncle Ben and Aunt May, we don't even know who his fucking parents are. And they don't even mention it. So wouldn't you think that that is a bit more of a casual approach to go to find out, to try to find out who Spider-Man's parents actually are? You know, especially, I love how in the beginning of the movie, the first scene is done. You know, with his parents not wanting to leave him, but they have to leave him. And it kind of reminds me of Hey Arnold. And for those of you, that part right there, it just straight up reminded me of Hey Arnold from Nickelodeon. That just completely reminded me of Hey Arnold. But and, you know, I thought it was really well done. It was an interesting story arc because you know it's good to to explain where his parents are. You know what happened to his parents. You know who were his parents. And I thought that was a good plot device. But I didn't think that they should have abandoned him going after Uncle Ben's killer. You know, that really, and that's something that, and I don't know if they were going to bring it up later on as the sequels progressed. You know, he was eventually going to find out whose Uncle Ben's killer was, and he was going to have conflict whether he should kill him or not, which would have made an interesting plot device, too, in a future Spider-Man movie, if they would have continued the Mark Webb trilogy. But, it is what it is. Sony is fucking stupid, like I said before. And if there are any dumbasses out there, Boonslayer, who want to defend big fucking corporations that are fucking retarded, go fuck yourselves, because you're fucking retarded as well for defending those big corporations, which you don't even get paid to defend them. But anyway, I really do like the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy. I really do. And there's just so many things, that it just does right. And people think that, Amazing Spider-Man 2 did a lot wrong. It's one of the worst comic. No, it's not. It's nowhere near as bad as Spider-Man 3. The pacing of the story. And let me tell you guys why I actually, I don't mind the fact that they brought in Harry and Electro in this movie real fast. Because first of all, they build up both of those characters pretty well, given, the fact that you're trying to build up two main villains in one movie. They actually did that pretty well, considering this. All right, you get to know a lot about Harry in this movie, and you get to see what kind of a guy Max Dillon is. Jamie Foxx, and before I get to Harry Osborn, let me talk about Electro for a second. Let me talk about Electro, because one thing that I kind of grinded my gears when I found out about this movie, that Electro was going to be in it and Jamie Foxx was going to be cast. And it just kind of, I didn't feel good at that, because I was just like, Electro? Jamie Foxx is going to be Electro. And I just thought it was going to be a complete miscast. And I still feel like I just don't buy into Jamie Foxx being an awkward social nerd. Like, I don't buy him being a socially awkward motherfucker. I don't buy into Jamie Foxx being like this social outcast. All right, anyone who knows anything about Hollywood who has seen Jamie Foxx in other movies, the last thing you think of when you think of Jamie Foxx is a nerd or a social outcast. So to me, even though he does a great job in this role, and he does a spectacular job with what he's given, I just don't see Jamie Foxx as a fucking nerd. I think they should have gotten fucking Guy Pearce from Iron Man 3 to play Electro, or get somebody who's who can actually play a fucking nerd. Or someone who's socially awkward. Because Jamie Foxx is he's he's a big time player in Hollywood. He's not a nerd. He's not, when I think of even, his other movies, last thing I think of Jamie Foxx is a nerd. That's the last thing I think of, a socially awkward nerd, when I think of Jamie Foxx. So to me, I just didn't think this was good casting, but I can see kind of why they did it. They wanted to bring a big name into the series, like Jamie Foxx, compared to Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, who, even though she was in Superbad and she was in that Straight A movie with Amanda Bynes, Emma Stone wasn't really a huge, big star Hollywood A-list player. She was still kind of looked at as kind of a teen actor. And Andrew Garfield, he was in The Social Network, but neither of them were like huge Hollywood names prior to these movies coming out. So they probably wanted to have like a big name like Jamie Foxx in the movie. So I could see why they tried to do it. But to me, it was just, I just couldn't see Jamie Foxx on paper. And the thing is, he does a great job in this movie with what he's given. He does a great job, but I just don't see him as, I don't think of a nerd when I see Jamie Foxx. But I do like how they bring up his origin story. They show him as, this socially awkward, he's kind of possessed with Spider-Man, which I didn't like. I didn't like how, he's obsessed with Spider-Man. He's like, yo, he actually noticed me. He actually noticed me. I didn't like that. I would have preferred, Jamie Foxx being a little more serious, because it just didn't look right. Jamie Foxx going bald and obsessing over Spider-Man just didn't look right in the movie to me. It just didn't look right. It just looked really awkward in a way that, it just didn't make sense. They should have had Jamie Foxx just being like, socially awkward, him kind of getting abused at his job, having to work on his fucking birthday, not giving the credit that he deserves when he came up with the blueprints, and basically them acting like his death never happened. I could definitely have sympathy toward, Electro's character just due to that alone, how fucked up Oscorp was, like some of the people in Oscorp were. I could definitely, be sympathetic toward Electro in this movie. But, I didn't like how they made him into like this obsessive over nerd. Like, oh, he had pictures of Spider-Man all over his apartment and shit like that. I didn't like that. Like, it was just like, wow, it's too much like Edward Nygma from Batman Forever. Too much like Jim Carrey's Edward Nygma from Batman Forever. To the point where he's like obsessing. It's just like, it's just weird. Like, I don't, like, no. I didn't agree with that. I think they should have made Max Dillon a more serious character. Kind of like the MTV version where, he was just sick of being, fucked around with. And now he's going to take it out on everyone else. I think that would have been better instead of like him obsessing over Spider-Man like that in this movie. But I can definitely see where they were coming from, and it did make and that scene definitely made Andrew Garfield look like a better Spider-Man than Tobey Maguire. Just trying to talk him out, trying to like, because he's a fan of Spider-Man and he's trying to help him out. And for all the people who say like, oh, Spider-Man's a jerk in these movies compared to Tobey Maguire, no. Just watch this scene where he tries to stop Electro from destroying New York City, Times Square. But, it for what he's given, he does a good job. Again, Jamie Foxx as Max Dillon. I just know. But Harry, on the other hand, I forget the actor who plays in this movie. He has a really good backstory about how he and his father have a bad relationship, and how basically he doesn't care about his father. He doesn't care, like, after he basically sent him away. And I could definitely see where Harry's coming from in this movie. He actually has valid points. And, it's not like he basically deserves the disease that he gets in this movie. And I feel sympathetic towards Harry as well in this movie, up until he becomes the Green Goblin. And even when he becomes the Green Goblin, I'm wishing that he kills this guy who tried to fuck him over in the company. I'm literally like, why the fuck doesn't he kill him? I'm like, Mark, I'm like, if you want to make this series of movies darker, have Harry Osborn kill this motherfucker. Right before he shows him where the suit is and the glider is, and has the the gas that makes him into the Green Goblin. And I also like the character design too, because he actually looks like a fucking goblin. It's not a fucking Power Ranger costume like in the Sam Raimi movies. I prefer this. I prefer this Green Goblin over this Green Goblin. Because to me, I mean, it just looks like it's like a kid suit. It looks like a kid suit. This Harry as Green Goblin actually looks disturbing. He looks fucking disturbing. He looks like a fucking goblin. He looks like a demon. You know, it's just something I prefer. I prefer this over William Dafoe's Green Goblin. I don't care. I do. I mean, to me, everything, like, well, not everything, but most of the stuff that's done in the Mark Webb trilogy just impresses me a lot more than the stuff that was done in the Raimi trilogy. And I feel like they tried to put more effort and use a lot more comic book influence. Like, even the death scene with Gwen Stacy at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. A lot of people were pissed about that because they're like, oh, it's not as good as the one in the comic. Well, what the fuck ever? You actually think that the Sam Raimi trilogy would have done it better? You really think that they would have done a better death scene with Gwen Stacy? Like, literally, Gwen Stacy was introduced in the fucking third film. Or even if they would have done it with Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane, it would not have been the same thing. We never got to see them get together. So if he killed Mary Jane in that scene where, you know, the Green Goblin is making him choose between the people on the bus and Mary Jane, it wouldn't have fucking mattered if she would have died in that movie. And you know for a fact it wouldn't have been that much of a big deal compared to this. This was done much better because not only do Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone have great chemistry together, you know, and not only is Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy a much more likable character who actually helps Spider-Man, you know, you actually believe like he lost his girlfriend in this scene. Like it's well done. Andrew Garfield, you know, he truly makes you convinced like he's literally pissed. He's literally like depressed. He even stops being Spider-Man for a while after this, you know, and that's a much better reason to stop being Spider-Man than, you know, magically losing your powers just because you're emotionally distressed. Like, literally, freaking Tobey Maguire can't even climb on the walls anymore. He can't even use his web anymore. It's like this magic emo web. You know, that doesn't happen in Garfield's movie. And I was so pissed off when that happened in Spider-Man 2. Like, all of a sudden, he can't be Spider-Man anymore. He loses his powers just because he's going through an emotional rut. I'm like, seriously, no. No. Like, seriously, no. All right. Andrew Garfield, like, it's just much more true to the comics, in my opinion, than Raimi's Tobey Maguire was. It's much more truer to the comics. And on top of that, you know, as far as best costume, while I did prefer the costume that Tobey Maguire wore over the original Amazing Spider-Man, because I just thought it was just way too... I thought it just tried to be too new for its own good. I do think that the costume in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is great. You know, it still has that cool new Amazing Spider-Man logo that I love so much. But the costume design itself goes back to the basics. It goes back to what Spider-Man is supposed to look like. Instead with those blue fingers that they try to give him in the original Amazing Spider-Man. But other than that, man, I just don't see what people see in the Raimi films. I'm sorry. I don't see what people see in them. I mean, in my opinion, the Raimi films just pissed me off a lot more. The only thing I would say I miss from the Raimi films that we don't get in the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy is J. Jonah Jameson. And, you know, I really wish they would have put him in the Amazing Spider-Man films, or at least the second one. Or have him, like, he should have been at least in the second one. You know, trying to abuse Spider-Man, like, oh, I need pictures. I'm trying, like, having him trying to prove that Spider-Man is a villain and stuff like that. You know, I really wish that they would have done that in this film. Compared, like, and the thing is, in the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy, no one is really against Spider-Man except for, like, the police. Like, you see Gwen Stacy's father, he's against Spider-Man. He thinks he's an amateur. But no one is really against Spider-Man in the Amazing Spider-Man films. No one is really against him like they are in the Sam Raimi films. Like, people they start praising him and then they hate him, and then they start praising him again and then they hate him, and it's just like back and forth, back and forth. And that's I kind of like that about the Mark Webb films better, because it's like, you know, for the most part, it's not like people are like two-faced about Spider-Man, you know, with the exception of Spider-Man 2, you know, and stuff like that, where they all saw him unmasked. It was just like, you know, why are they going, but why are they trying to make him feel like he's hated? Why are they trying to make him feel like he's loved? Like, to me, that was kind of like foolish. You know, there should be certain people against Spider-Man, but for the most part, I don't really want to see like what they were trying to do, like the way they were trying to go with it, like, oh, Spider. And then, like, when Spider-Man went away, people wanted him back. It was annoying to like see that, and just caused for so much more foolishness with Tobey Maguire's character. He was like, oh, what should I continue doing what I'm doing? Am I right for doing what I'm doing? And it ended up being really, like, I know some people like that about the Raimi trilogy. I didn't. You know, Spider-Man, you know, he is supposed to have a little bit of that, like, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. All I know is, you know, I have to do it. And Andrew Garfield, he just takes a step forward. He's not like questioning himself whether he should or shouldn't. You know, he's just going forward. You know, he wants to be better. You know, and that's another thing I just like about Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. But I really do wish J. Jonah Jameson would have been in the Amazing Trilogy, especially the guy who plays him. I keep forgetting his name, but this guy from the original Raimi films, I wish he would have been in the Amazing Trilogy. That way, you know, it was just funny seeing him. It was just like, he's a menace. It was perfect. It was just like the comics. But, you know, it's like whatever. It's not like a huge big deal to me that he wasn't in the movies, but I really wish he would have been in the movies. I think it would have added just a little more comedy, just a little, and it would have like added to, especially like later on in the comics, you know, when J. Jonah Jameson, you know, he tries to get Scorpion to kill Spider-Man and prove Spider, and it's just when he gets Matt Gorgon later on in the comics. For those of you who pay attention to the comics, but I think it would have added something later on in the films. You know, we could have got Matt Gorgon as Scorpion, you know, but it is what it is, you know. I mean, to me, I'll always think that the Mark Webb films are much better. Even with all the flaws that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has, it's still a much more interesting movie. I still care about Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. I still want to see what's going to happen next. You know, we still don't know who Uncle Ben's killer is, so that could have been a plot device in the future movie. And again, the darker tone of Mark Webb's movies is just it's a more serious, darker tone. And it's just like, wow, you know, fine, like, we need this. We need a Spider-Man movie that's, you know, actually going to be a darker tone. Like, Raimi's, the only time it really got dark was when, you know, the whole Harry Osborn versus Spider-Man, like, those were some really intense moments, you know, especially because of their history. But the Raimi films, and you would think a guy like Sam Raimi, who made movies like The Evil Dead and fucking Darkman and stuff like that, you would think that his Spider-Man would be a lot darker in tone. But it's kind of like he doesn't even care about the Spider-Man comics. He just wants to make whatever he can. You know, which is, I just don't like his films. You know, I tried to like him too, but I don't like his fucking films. But, you know, I just prefer Andrew Garfield. I prefer I prefer the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy. That's all I'm going to say. I'm done. One other thing I want to mention before I end this video is how, you know, I'm going to compare the Lizard, Dr. Kirk Connors' character, to Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2. And the reason I'm going to do that is because, you know, it's basically, this is one other thing I had with the Amazing Trilogy, you know, but I had a bigger problem with it actually with Spider-Man 2. I had a much bigger problem with it with Spider-Man 2, is the fact that I'm sick of seeing, like, these good scientists who are, like, acclaimed and award-winning scientists, you know, good guys who well respected, turning into like evil villains cliche. It's just, I know what happens in the comics. I know what happens in the comics, but you know, with Doc Ock, it's just kind of like, if people talk about how the villains were forced to turn bad in Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they forget to bring up that Doc Ock was forced to become Doc Ock in that movie. All right, if you just rewatch Spider-Man 2 and tell me he's not forced into basically becoming Doc Ock, and some people will be like, well, you know, his experiment controlled him. You know, the octopus arms were controlling him, and that's why he became a bad guy and stuff like that. And that, like, even that is just so poorly done and so cheesy in Spider-Man 2. Like, but I'm gonna speak on top of like how I didn't like it in The Amazing Spider-Man either, because Kurt Connors, you know, he worked with Peter's father, you know, he's well respected, and all of a sudden he just becomes a mad scientist forcefully, you know, like he just, and like my biggest problem is they could have went into more discussion on why. I mean, personally, and this is how I would have done it. This is just how I would have done it. All right, bear with me. I would have made Kurt Connors much more of a bitter, cynical motherfucker compared to how he was in this movie, which was just a regular scientist. You know, he was much more happy, you know, but I would have made him more sinister and bitter. Like, he lost his arm in the war. He's been trying to find a cure to regrow his arm for years. You know, make him real bitter. Let him still be friends with Peter Parker, and let him still admire Peter Parker, and Peter Parker admire him for his scientific achievements and stuff like that. But make Dr. Kurt Connors a bitter motherfucker. You know, don't just have him like let him get frustrated to the point where, you know, he's desperate to get his arm back, to the point where he's like failing and failing. And they do that in this movie, but it's not to the point where he's really frustrated. Like, show his frustration of him trying to get his arm back. You know, like in this movie, they tested on like reptiles and stuff like that. And you know, but it's literally like, if they want to go in a darker tone, and they did, but if they really wanted to go in a darker tone, they would have made Kurt Connors much more bitter and cynical at the world. Like, oh man, I lost my arm. This is bullshit. You know, let him start like complaining a little bit, you know, even to Peter a little bit, you know, just to the fact, like, I've been trying to do the studies on how I can, you know, do reproduction and make my arm grow back and stuff like that, you know, all that scientific crap, you know, and do that, you know, instead of like, you know, he's just like he was just way too jolly up until he finally turned evil, which was just like, it was like, oh, the big twist, he's evil now. It was just like, yeah, we knew he was going to turn into the villain. Anybody who read the comics knew he was going to turn into a lizard. And we've seen it in the trailers. But like, have like a more gradual progression of how he turned into like the lizard and stuff. You know? And that's the same thing with like, you know, Doc Ock with The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like, literally, he was well respected. He had dinner with Doc Ock at one point in one scene in the movie. You know, it's just like, you know, and all of a sudden his experiment goes bad and he decides to become a bad guy. Like, literally, and Harry's like, oh, Doc Ock is going to put, Otto Octavius is going to put Oscorp back on the map, and all of a sudden they fuck up. He fucks up his experiment, and now he's a bad guy. You know, they don't even have any gradual, like, there's no real change in that movie either, which kind of like, you know, it was just like, it just happened. But, you know, I don't care. This may be nitpicking to some people, but that's just my thoughts. I would have preferred that. And on that note, I'm done. Later.